Brought to you by Accenture Extended Reality. This is Field of View.
Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Kolayani.
And my name is Nick Rosa from Accenture.
And welcome to a very special episode again of A Field of View. Today we're joined by a really interesting individual in the XR investment space, someone who I've always bumped in at every single XR event that I've ever been to, and someone that I really look up to when I look at the financing of some really interesting XR experiences that even yourself may have tried.
Yes, we're going to talk about hardcore gaming, we're going to talk about VR development, we're going to talk about the early days of this new renaissance of immersive technologies, but in particular we're going to talk about how to invest in VR companies and what is the secret sauce in order to raise money, eventually to become unicorns in the VR space. It's a pleasure and an honor to have the Venture Reality co-founder, Tipatat Chennavasin. Hi Tipatat, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing very well. Excited to be here. Let's get into it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Daniel,
well, you go Nick first. No, you go first.
Okay, perfect. So we usually ask a little bit of a background to our guests, like a sort of a origin story of where they, how they arrived to be part of this immersive world and immersive technologies world. But first and foremost, would you like to give us a little bit of an overview of your role in the Venture Reality Fund? What is your day-by-day job, and what do you do in the fund in particular?
Sure. So the fund is really my partner, Marco Demiras, and I. So we're co-general partners, and we do everything. So we, as a venture fund, you really do three main things. It's you source deals, you invest in companies and then give them support. And then, of course, you find more investors for your fund. Like those are the three. And you, of course, work with your investors, right? So I guess four things, really. But that's the main of what we do. But honestly, most of my day-to-day is talking to founders and, helping them, whether they're in our portfolio or not. We kind of view ourselves as, one of the major funds in this sector. So we try to be supportive and helpful for everyone, try to give open and honest feedback at every stage, try to connect, try to, problem solve. And me and my partner both have been founders ourselves, and we know how tough it is. And when I was on my entrepreneurial journey, there were, a handful of VCs that really were super helpful, even if they didn't invest. And I try to model myself after some of those folks, who really showed me how to be a proper VC.
And you invested in already in more than 40 companies in the XR space. Would you like to give us a little bit of drop some names of the companies, the most successful ones that you invested
Sure.
on? We know that you have a unicorn in your catalog of companies.
Yeah, so we've been doing this for almost 5.5 years now as a fund, and we focus on early stage, so seed and Series A, and we do virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence investing. And like you alluded to, the first software unicorn in VR, company called Rec Room, we were one of the first checks in. They're one of the pioneers of the metaverse, and started with a VR focus, was one of the first viable VR social platforms, and then really expanded beyond that. They're now on console like PlayStation. They're on PlayStation VR, but also on regular PlayStation, on Xbox, and also on iOS. And it's really great, in terms of the creator community and how much interesting things they've done. And we've also invested in one of the most successful VR game studio, Beat Games, who created Beat Saber. They recently announced they made over $180 million in revenue. Which is crazy considering it's just been 3 years since they launched, and they were acquired by Facebook over a year and a half ago. Job Simulator, or the creator of Job Simulator, Alchemy Labs, they're one of the very first VR hits as well. But again, consumer and gaming is just a small part of our portfolio. We've done a lot of other investments, with Wave, they're pioneer in virtual concerts, but also we've done healthcare, we've done education and training, we've done data science, life science. One of our companies, Apprentice, they're an AR solution for bio life sciences. They became critical during the pandemic because what they do is allow collaborative work and remote work for farm laboratories, essentially, right? And so this is amazing, but they helped accelerate some of the COVID vaccines, and the founder's mom actually got to take the vaccine that the company had actually helped accelerate and get to the market in record time. So that, those are some of the things, again, where it's just amazing to see the impact that these technologies can have, not just on the way we play, but the way that we work, the way that we live, the way that we heal. It's really exciting to support, founders in this category doing profound work.
That's amazing. So wait, like that's where you are today, I guess, and that's the kind of like companies you've done. But I'm interested, what's the story to how you get to someone like that? Take me back to the very beginning. I'm really interested.
Sure. I mean, as a kid, I kind of always grew up, born, a kid of the 80s and 90s. And, I always had this love of magic. And for me, like animation was the first magic I saw, where you could take paper and images and create life. Right. And then video games came out, and I was like, oh my gosh, and now you can make it interactive. And so I've always loved this, like, intersection of technology and creativity to create magic. And really, early on, I saw this potential in what like would eventually, lead me on this path of like VR and AR. I was animating just for fun. I learned computer graphics and like, to 3D model. As soon as I could, I started like scripting little basic games on my calculator, then in the browser, then using Flash. I was really into like Newgrounds back in the day, submitting animation there. And, eventually, got Unity, started playing with that, built my own game company, and really fell in love with this idea of like, oh gosh, like we can create anything, we can do anything with these tools, and that they were pretty much like freely available, and it was just amazing. And then really it was, flash forward, I see the Kickstarter for Oculus, and John Carmack was backing it, and anything John Carmack says, I will listen to, right? And so I bought it, the DK1. I tried it. It was a little rough, but it showed the promise of like, oh my gosh, like something around the corner is going to be so profound. And then it was really the DK2 that showed like the positional tracking and how powerful that was to engage that extra like sense. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, this is just incredible. I started building more demos. One of the early demos I built with some friends, Eric Bale and John Dadley, it was trying to recreate scenes from the movie The Matrix. But instead of watching the movie, you live the movie. You get to be Neo talking to Morpheus when it explains to you that the world's an illusion and that you're really just a battery. And then you get to do some of the cool scenes like dodging bullets on the rooftop or the jump program. And so making the jump program, you see Morpheus, so you're in the construct, then you get teleported onto the rooftop. Morpheus talks to you, he does the jump. And then you have to free your mind. So then you this is still controller based on the DK2, but you push forward, you kind of move forward, you press the button, you jump. And then if you look down, you actually fall down 40 stories, and then you kind of bounce off the floor like in the movie, right? And creating that experience, and this was just a nights and weekends project that we, didn't spend that much time on. But I somehow accidentally hacked my brain and cured myself of my real life fear of heights. And so that kind of showed me, that was my aha moment where I saw, oh my gosh, this is not just, the next Nintendo. This is a new, profound new medium that has the ability to do something, unique, profound, unseen before, in terms of, how we experience the world. And so, that my aha moment of this is going to change everything. Right. And so I wanted to be more than just a game developer. I wanted to really do something more impactful for the space. And I realized my superpower at that time was, I was technical, I was creative, but I was also an entrepreneur. I had started my own mobile game company. I worked with investors. I got an M&A for it. So I knew how startup, especially early stage startup, worked. And that allowed me to speak to investors, but also speak to game developer, early VR, AR developers, and really speak the language and be that bridge between the two. And so then I helped, set up the first VR, AR incubator. I was involved with the first cohort, and then I helped pick some of the companies in the second cohort, and then left, had the opportunity to join forces with my good friend Marco, and then we created the Venture Reality Fund. And we're $50 million fund based out of Silicon Valley, investing in early stage VR, AR, AI. We just recently announced we have a second fund, and it's just been amazing to be on this kind of journey and supporting these founders.
How do you see the industry changed across the years? Because right now we are not yet at the big bang moment of VR. We're really, really close, but we are not there yet. but it seems that, the pot is started boiling in a certain sense. How do you feel the sentiment has changed when you talk to your investors about VR when you started and right now? Has anything changed since then?
Sure. For us and a lot of the people that were like, seriously putting in the work, we knew this was going to be a long journey, right? We knew this wasn't going to be 3 years and everyone's going to have a VR headset, right? Like we knew this was going to have to be, we were starting at the beginning of like the cell phone revolution or the PC desktop revolution, right? Like it took a long time for us to get there. And we thought, this would be at least, 5 to 10 year journey, right? To get to where we need to go. And what's been really interesting is, it got overhyped. People were expecting this to be, the next iPhone next year. And it's like, when it gets overhyped, then you have that big dip when it doesn't happen overnight. But what's really interesting is, during the VR winter, that's when, companies like Beat Games made Beat Saber, right? And they're making, tens of millions when people are like, oh my gosh, VR is dead. And it's like, no, like clearly people are finding, a lot of joy and fulfillment from this. And also this was one on the enterprise side, right? Like companies were putting in the work, doing the POCs, really finding the return on investment for these VR use cases, right? And we have to start from scratch because again, this is a whole brand new medium, right? We can't just say, oh, this is what works and let's just port it. And it's like, no, we have to develop from scratch and kind of find out what's really unique about it. And it was going to take some time to figure these things out. But clearly we found those use cases both in consumer and in the enterprise. And now we're starting to kind of see it like it has to be a combination of use case and the combination of hardware at the right price and right function and feature set, right? And I think we finally gotten there, right? Like I think it took a while, right? When we first started, we're like, what is VR? Is cardboard VR? Is 3DOF mobile VR? Is that valuable? Is 360 video valuable? And we've kind of like pared away all of that, like sifted through all of that. And now it's clearly defined. Okay, 6 degrees of freedom, head tracking, hand tracking on an all-in-one headset. Like that's going to be the mobile consumer play, the clear, winners of the category. It's not just, experiencing things in 360. It's actually interacting with things and moving around and having that kind of spatial interaction, engaging your visual memory, your spatial memory. Like all of those things are really what makes VR unique. And once companies have figured that out, then they're able to find that success. And really what's been interesting to me is like kind of just seeing like the waves of where it goes. I'll give you an example on the enterprise side, right? Like the very first successful, big VR use case was training. That's what VR was originally developed for, right? Like training in the Air Force. And we've kind of seen that come to fruition. Like, companies like Striver, Tailspin, Interplay Learning, they're doing great stuff in terms of like training people to do their real job better.
And Accenture.
And Accenture, yes, of course. I mean, honestly, Accenture is like powering a lot of this and doing the studies that get the real ROI out. But what's really interesting, though, is like the next wave was when people are productive inside VR and AR and doing the work in these tools. And that's what we're starting to see. And so it's like, I'll give you an example on healthcare, right? So, it's really powerful, of course, to train surgeons, to make them better, to reduce the risk. But what's even more impactful in my mind is doing things like augmented surgery. We have a company called Proprio, and what they do is, you put on the headset, they have a pretty much like a depth camera, like a light field camera that captures the surgical site in 3D, like 3 dimensions. Then that fuses with the 3D scan data and let surgeons do their work faster, more effective, less errors. And so it's
you're talking more about the operational side or the training side?
Because on the operational side. So surgical navigation during the operation, right? Like, so this is the thing, using the tools to do the work, not just training and then putting the tools aside and then doing the work, but actually doing the work in the tools. So to me, that's like really powerful, really impactful. It reduces the training time, augments the person, I think, and we're going to see a lot more of that. Like, Ford, they've been designing cars in VR using a program called Gravity Sketch. And it's like, it's not just training now, they're actually being productive. And that's the real value. And, kind of how this translates also into, what we see with Rec Room in the metaverse. It's fundamentally, I think what one of VR superpowers is it really democratizes 3D creation. So not just 3D visualization, but working in 3D, creating 3D, whether that's designing a car for Ford or designing a game level in Rec Room. And so when we saw the creator tools that Rec Room put out, where people are creating inside the program in VR, it's been much more accessible. And so they have a much higher ratio of creators to players than like Roblox or like non-VR solutions. And so that's kind of showing off, some of that, being productive, creating, doing stuff inside VR.
And Tipatat, that 3D creation side of things has always been, I guess, a passion of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, as a kid, I loved animation, and I used to do the drawing and with my parents' camcorder, taking pictures and creating like stop motion film animation that way. But as soon as I got like a Mac and the early tools back then, fell in love with 3D animation and started modeling, and I did that professionally. That was my job for a while. But then as I kind of switched careers, I kind of hadn't really done much 3D modeling, 3D animation, and then Skillman and Hackett put out Tilt Brush with Google, and I kind of, and there's a whole slew of other amazing VR art programs like Medium, Oculus Medium, which was acquired by Adobe, and then Google Blocks, and that really just opened my eyes to being like, oh yeah, like gosh, 3D animation or 3D modeling is fun again and interesting. And I could see this being more approachable, more accessible, and kind of like how desktop computers, when they had a GUI and a Windows interface, a keyboard and mouse, it really revolutionized, 2D communication, 2D design, right? Like desktop publishing with like Adobe, but also even with PowerPoint, right? Like before desktop publishing and PowerPoint, like no one knew what a font was. No one cared about these things. Now everyone knows and thinks about these things because they have to give these presentations and they have to use these tools. And in that same way, I do think that VR and AR, like spatial computing, will democratize 3D design and 3D communication in a meaningful way.
There is an interesting topic that comes up very often during the conversation that I have with my clients at Accenture, which is, we tried XR, but we've done a POC and we never been able to scale. What do you think it takes for any company to be able to scale XR? Because we've seen a lot of tactical experiences, but very little strategy behind immersive and 3D and XR in general. What is your take on that?
No, that's a great question. And, I'll tell you what we've seen from the companies that have been able to get over that hump. And essentially, it's a combination of two things. It's one, solving the right problem, making sure that the problem is big enough, valuable enough. And then two, it is a combination of like the right hardware and the right infrastructure software, like business support for it to make it more frictionless. Right. Like I think when the value proposition was, okay, they have to buy a new PC, IT has to support, manage, and update a new Windows device. And then there's, the VR headset itself. And, it's kind of unwieldy and expensive. And then you're like, okay, if you can get an all-in-one system that self-manages itself, that you can have relatively easy, in terms of device management and making sure it's up to date and making sure there's no issues. Like if it can be more of like an appliance and less like a computer, then I think, you can get a lot faster in terms, or lower that friction in terms of the bar. But so I think the combination of the right use case and then the right, like, hardware and hardware infrastructure supporting it. Like, it's definitely one of those things where we've seen the Quest has been amazing for consumers, but it's been a little harder to deploy in the enterprise, right? Like I think, it's clear Oculus is doing what they can, but they are, or Facebook is doing what they can, but they are primarily focused on consumer, not enterprise. And so, figuring out like those things of, just like the stuff that Microsoft does so well in terms of, device management, identity management, all this kind of stuff, right? To make it very easy to deploy complex systems and applications into the field. Like we need, Oculus to kind of step up, or, other all-in-one VR headset makers to kind of step up in that way and create that easy to deploy ecosystem, right? I see you kind of nodding, right? Like that's a lot of the feedback I get when I talk to these companies that are like, oh my gosh, like these are
we have other competitors coming to the market. Pico announced the Neo 3 very recently. There is an announcement that is coming very soon from HTC, and things are eating up on that sense.
Yeah.
We we know, though, that the true holy grail of XR is to have something that is completely agnostic from the hardware, and eventually something that will create a sort of capital of knowledge for companies that are creating assets in 3D and experiences in 3D. First of all, it's important to create a sort of an optimized pipeline for three-dimensional product and assets. So from design to training to connected worker to marketing and sales and post-sales. So you can use all those 3D data across all the different parts of the value chain. But there is this obviously this future that is in the cloud and is powered by 5G, is powered by Wi-Fi 6, and is powered even by 6G that already is in talks by a lot of people around in the market. Can you tell us more your take about this kind of future in the cloud and empowered by high-speed connectivity and low latency?
I also guess as well, it would also be interesting, following on from Nick's point there, is how that has an impact on, the kind of companies that you invest in. And, I guess what that means for those kind of companies that are being invested in based on the knock-on effect that hardware has.
Sure. It's funny, like, a lot of people are like, oh, 5G, why are we talking about it so much? And it's like, well, if you actually look back at history, right, it's like 3G and 4G were so important for unlocking the true capabilities of the smartphone, right? Like, that bandwidth, bump up that allowed people to have internet on their phone with 3G and then video on their phone with 4G, right? That enabled really what happened with the smartphone. So it's like the plumbing that needs to get out there. And in that same way, 5G, and potentially 6G, right, will do that same kind of thing where not just increase bandwidth for richer experiences, but more importantly is the low latency. And this is the key. It's like, how do we get from the big bricks on our heads, faces to like smart glass or to like sunglass style form factors? And it's really going to be by offloading the compute into the cloud or into the edge, right? And 5G will have that latency that will make that not just a pipe dream, but something that actually works and functions. But what that means is there has to be an investment in new hardware and software that's going to enable that to happen, right? There's going to have to be potentially new rendering technologies, new file formats for 3D, like all sorts of stuff that's going to enable all of that to work more seamlessly and to be optimized for cloud and streaming solutions. And so with us and how we kind of view Fund 2, 5G does become a bigger part of the equation. And that's why we're working with Qualcomm, Orange, LG Plus, and other telcos to really figure out, understand, and invest smartly into the right technology infrastructure backbone, but also applications that take advantage of it and make sure that they work as we envision it, as we know it should, right? But I think that goal of, okay, what does the next generation look like? If we're saying right now VR is at like the candy phone, like Nokia candy phone or Motorola flip phone. How do we get to the iPhone? How do we get to that next form factor that's going to be really mainstream and mass market in a 10x, 100x way? That is by getting, I believe by, leveraging 5G, offloading compute, increasing battery life, increasing comfort, all of those kinds of things. That we'll get there. And hopefully we'll accelerate it.
Sorry, Daniel, go on.
I was going to say, if you take then a company like Wave, which I know that you guys invested in, right? Yes. How does a technology like this impact one of those members of your portfolio?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think again, it kind of turbocharges what they do, right? Like this idea of, okay, how do you create? And with the Wave, their virtual concerts.
Got some dancing right now.
And they're really focused on the social community and the interaction with the artists and performers in real time. So if you go to one of their concerts, you'll kind of see this where, you type a message, it shows up in part of the background, of course, and then the artist can see that, respond to it. But then you can also do stuff like, power up, buy gifts, send gifts, show like impact, change the visuals, vote on elements of it, and then even be part of like it's kind of like the Soul Train dance off where they use the web camera and you can actually be on stage on screen with the performer. But what's really interesting is, okay, well, how does 5G make that better? By lowering the latency, by allowing more people to be concurrent in the same session, by again, allowing it to be in more immersive platforms. Right now, the Wave, they're focused on where the audience is with like flat screens, but they started out as a fully immersive system. And it's like they want to go back to those roots, and they're going to need the low latency and the high bandwidth of 5G to make that happen. I mean, definitely doing things like volumetric video and streaming that, so you can actually see the face of the performer. Have multiple performers, so it's like, if you want to have a crazy boy band like BTS, all of them perform all of their moves rendered for everyone. You just want to increase that quality. And another investment of ours, Epic Games, you kind of see where they're kind of pushing the quality of things like metahumans to create more realistic avatars and digital humans. We can see that that's very high bandwidth, and to do that in a way that we can push that into more devices and have a group of people that look at that high quality performing, like that would be a pretty big challenge, and we'd need edge compute to make that happen.
I want to be provocative right now.
Sure.
Usually when there is a problem, there is an opportunity, right? So during the pandemic, we've all been locked into our house for a very long time. 1 year and a half has passed almost. And we kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. That is in form of a vaccine, but we don't know when travel will be allowed and so on. Of course, there's been a sort of acceleration in technology's adoption. There are people that are saying that, for example, virtual shopping and virtual show floors advanced something like 10 years in only 1 year, just because of COVID, because obviously people need to buy things, and the supply chain had to accelerate the way that they're not only delivering things, but also marketing and selling things. My question is, the VR and XR space, though, and the social VR and XR space didn't catch this opportunity, though. It seems to me, right? So there are platforms like, of course, Rec Room VR Chats. Horizon is still in beta and hasn't been launched during the pandemic, which is kind of a missed opportunity from Facebook at this point. But nobody has been able to surf the wave of this need of connecting people during the pandemic. Is it a problem of infrastructure? Is it a problem of technology? Is it a problem of user experience? Is it a problem of, people not yet ready to put an headset on their face? What is the problem from your point of view?
So I'd push back, and I would say, again, we saw record usage of like Rec Room and VR Chat during the pandemic, right? Like massive jumps in concurrence and all that. But I will say you are right, though, it was gated for a long time. If we think about during most of the pandemic, like from March till October, which was like the most of the shut-in time, Quest 2 wasn't available yet. Quest 1 was in very limited supply because of, it's always been in kind of limited availability. And I think also too, they were stopping production gearing up for the Quest 2, but no one really knew that. And so, there is this sense of like, why didn't VR take off during that time? Well, no one had access to the devices, right? Like it was hard to even buy a Quest 1 at that point. And then when Quest 2 became available, now it's become the best-selling VR headset. It's only been available since October, really like 2 quarters, right? And they say they've already sold more than any other VR headset they've ever made. And so you can kind of see like it's definitely happening. It just takes a little bit of time for it to get out there, just because again, it's not a application we already have on our phone. We have to buy a new device. And so in one sense, it is happening in a way. It just kind of takes, but the way that we think about things, we're like instant. Well, it's definitely happening as fast as it can. I think, Facebook's been on record saying they're selling Quests as fast as they can produce them.
Yeah.
But, at the same time, it is only Facebook. There is no other consumer, all-in-one headset of that quality that's available now, right? And that would help really speed up the marketplace as well. So I feel like the applications are there. Definitely the user interest is there. But it's just, about getting more headsets out there to more people at this point for the consumer and for that kind of social experience. I think, again, like the stuff I see that people do in VR Chat and Rec Room is just amazing. Like, I saw in Rec Room, this was a little while back, but it's like, this was pre-pandemic, but it was a high school theater group. They put together a play of The Princess Bride where they built their own costumes in VR, their own sets in VR, and then people watched the full play in VR. And it's just like, people are willing to do these things. Like it's so interesting to see what's possible. And I don't know if the Rec Room creators ever thought that was going to happen in the tool, but it's like, oh my gosh, the creativity is just insane. Once you get a mass audience and they want to start participating and playing with the stuff that they've created. And, in the same way, like VR chat, right? Like they have this, they host this virtual Comiket, which is like a Japanese, Comiket is one of the biggest amateur anime manga marketplaces, right? Where people sell, it's like a convention essentially, like the Comic Con.
Is that VCAT?
Japan. Yeah. So VCAT, right, is what it's kind of turned into now, and it's like.
And VCAT was a VR awards winner for last year as well, who really proved some really amazing stuff that they did just through some of the numbers alone as well. So yeah.
And so that idea of like people getting together in a virtual space, buying and selling things that they could use in the virtual world, but also that they would take home and use offline, like that's happening. And it always kind of starts in it starts off as a niche, and then it just grows into the mainstream. And I think what's more important is that we're seeing those like use cases happening. And now we just have to export them into the larger mainstream by reducing the friction. And Oculus has done a great job in terms of like cost and hardware, but also, doing things like, making sure the right IP is connected. And it's like, right now they have the right IP for the Japanese audience, but if Disney or Marvel wants to do, or Star Wars wants to do it for their fans, they totally can now. And they have the model for how that works. And then they can take it to the next level. Right. So I think the pieces we're starting to see kind of come into place, and it's all just assembling it right together in the right way. But yeah, I absolutely see it happening.
Shall we go back a little bit towards investment funds and how startup can get your attention in order to get funding? What is, from your point of view, the top 3 qualities that a product or a startup should have, or even a founder should have, in order to be palatable for investing?
Sure. Yeah, and it's funny, like the answers changed over the years. Like, when we first started doing investment in the VR space, there wasn't even consumer headsets weren't even out yet. And so we really had to take a leap of faith, and we really just focused on the team and the founder themselves. And while that's still the most important thing, understanding, okay, the founder, their background, their expertise, their insight, and their passion. But, now it's like, okay, there are headsets out there. The tools, are free to use. And it's like, who's actually creating stuff? Like when I see founders that pitch me this thing and we're like, hey, we need, X amount of money to even build anything, to even see anything. I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, I'd rather have the founders are like, hey, we've built something. We put it out in the market. We already get the good signals. And now we know we can, accelerate this and put the foot on the gas. Like that's
so
one
like
of the
a
things.
POC.
Yeah, a POC.
Like POC or a build or something that you can show.
Like, there has to be something that we can try and we can understand and we can get that sense of, okay, is this impactful or not, right? And then on the other side too, and this varies between consumer and enterprise, of course, right? Like I think with the enterprise side, you can get POCs, you get paid pilots, like that's the most important thing. And for us, we're definitely looking for the ones that are breaking out of pilot and into full product, right? Like that's when it becomes really interesting. And then it's also a lot about the market opportunity. Is this a venture scale opportunity, right? Like there's a lot of good business ideas that just don't have that like high growth that a venture model works for. So I get a lot of mismatch where people pitch me interesting ideas. They could be good, but they're niche, or, again, it's like, it's set up for a great lifestyle business. Like they could make millions in revenue, but how do they make hundreds of millions in revenue? And that's also like, a big
scale. You're talking about scale.
Right? Yeah. Are they venture scale, right? And then, lastly, the one thing I would say too is, again, like we've seen this, like the most successful game in VR, Beat Saber, right? Like they actually didn't take any financing. They didn't take any publishing deals. What they did was, they used early access, very smart. They like, if you guys were publishers and a team came to you and said, hey, we've won some design awards, but we've never had a real huge hit on mobile, but we're a good team. We know what we're doing. We want to make a VR rhythm game that's going to have unlicensed music made by our CEO, 10 tracks, and it's just single player, right? People be like, that doesn't sound like enough of a game to really launch, right? But when they put out Beat Saber, they made, 2 million in a month during the VR winter, right? And then that allowed them to expand the game, build on it, double down. And that's when, we got involved, was like right before the launch. But like, it was very clear when I played the demo, like this was something special, this was something unique. And then when we saw it launch and hit, we're like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is like, they nailed it, right? And what I really liked was, again, they're not trying to do everything. They just took one game mechanic and just laser focused, refined it, sharpened it, and made it beautiful. And I feel like I'm still getting these like weird pitches from people that, are coming to the space. They played the quest, they're excited, and they're like, hey, I need 3 to 5 million to build my VR game. I don't even have a demo. And I'm like, how do I even know the fundamentals of your VR game work? Like, this makes no sense.
Can we, okay. Now, rebooting the question that
Sure.
I said before, there is still a lot of gimmicky use of extended reality. A lot of people are coming with gimmicky ideas. Even, I'm having conversation with people. So you can do this in extended reality. I say, yeah, you could, but why? What's
do you want to do that?
Do you want to do that? Yes, you can do that. But yeah, what qui prodest, they would say in Latin, who's taking advantage of it. So at the end of the day, we are talking about the importance of user-centric design and user experience, right? So being able to solve a problem with the technology and using the technology as an enabler rather than a starting point.
Yeah.
And then making the experience as comfortable and as enjoyable as possible. So shall we say that, of course, you need to have something to show, and if you have something to show, will be best. But if you have a really good design idea, that could work too, in order to be invested on.
Like, I mean, but honestly too, like it's always about the execution, right? Like, even if the idea is great, if the execution falls flat, like that's where, and that's why the demo is so important, right? Because we can talk about the same thing, makes sense, but then the way the execution's done, do you understand what it really takes to get it to that polished level where it works and it fulfills the needs? But I think you're right though, fundamentally, right? Like when you're like, okay, what's something investable? And this ties back to a lot of things we said, like scale and all that, but it's just like, what's the problem you're solving, and is it really valuable? Is it it's
the
like,
need?
Is it a pain point? Like, how much people are paying to solve this? I'll give a concrete example here. Like, I meet so many education companies in the early days of VR where they're like, oh my gosh, education in VR. We can take people on field trips, like anywhere around the world. How amazing is that? I'm like, hey, schools don't pay for field trips. Like, that's not something that, like, it's not part of core curriculum. And, it's just like, it's not a real problem. Like, yeah, VR can be used for that and it can be a great experience, but that doesn't mean it's a valuable experience, right? Like, there's no value in the market. But if you look at where people are spending, especially not the school spending, but where the parents are spending, and they're like, man, they spend so much money on standardized test prep. And, in the US, it's like the SAT, right? It's like, man, when I was a kid, my parents would throw as much money as they could, for SAT prep classes, to books, to make sure, because again, that unlocks colleges, that unlocks better, job opportunities, all that kind of stuff, right? And so it's like, if you could show me a VR application, didn't take people on field trips, but use spatial memory, like use the memory palace to increase people's SAT scores by, 10%, 5%. Oh my gosh, like, what home wouldn't have a VR headset then, right? Like, so it's like, if you find the right need, I feel like people are constantly saying, okay, VR could be used for this. This would be a cool thing, but it's like, okay, well, how many people really want that? How many people currently pay for that? And is this a better way of doing it? I mean, the other area too that we've seen is like, even if VR is a better way of doing it, if the current way is good enough, then it doesn't matter that VR is a better way of doing it. Like, the current way satisfies the needs of the consumers enough that it doesn't outweigh the friction and the cost of adopting a new technology, right? So that's another area that I see, people kind of stumble upon. I think,
that's really interesting, because it's definitely something that I highlight a lot with people. It's like they think about XR and they have this product and everything like that, but I'm like, okay, but can you do it in real life? And is there any real reason why you like difference to it being in VR to being in real life? And sometimes even things just like, oh, well, the person doesn't have to travel there is not really enough. Sometimes, I guess.
No, I absolutely agree there. Yeah, I think it's also interesting too, where people are like, okay, how can we, like it's like, is it cheaper? Like if cheaper is just the thing that you're focused on, it's kind of a losing proposition. It has to be better, right? And I think that's like, and how profoundly better. Like you see, you hear this a lot for startups, right? It's like 10x better is
I
generally the
love it.
benchmark, right? And so it's like when you're focused, it's like, okay, how much are you saving? Are you saving thousands or are you saving millions, right? Like of dollars, yeah. Or how profound is this? And so I'll focus on one of our companies too. In the healthcare sector, they're a company called Vivid Vision, and they do eye therapy. And so when people ask, "Oh, isn't VR bad for your eyes?" I always counter with, "We actually have a startup that actually uses VR to strengthen your eyes and improve your eyesight." And so what they do is they cure people that have diplopia or lazy eye. And what's very interesting is the current methodology for treating people, it only works for juveniles, for kids, and people age out of the current treatment. So when you're an adult, no longer works, and it's only like 40% effective. So for them, they found this way of treating people using VR where it's 60% effective, so more effective, right? But it works for adults as well as for kids. And so now it treats a population that was untreatable before. And so that's the bigger impact, right? Not just
10x
that it's
better.
more effective for kids, but again, it's 1,000x better because like there
Yeah,
was
yeah.
no option for kids or for adults, right? So understanding we're like, okay, where is it really a breakthrough? Where is it really moving the needle in a significant way? Like that's where the real value is, right?
So I'm also okay. We speak at AIXR. We speak a lot with startups. I
Mhm,
think it's just the nature of the XR industry. A lot of new people always coming to the table.
mhm.
Now, a lot of the time, there also seems to be between founders and VCs. There seems to be this disconnect or confusion, I would say, between the actual process that's involved. So, I mean, you talked about, I think, what a ideal company to invest in is like, but what's that process actually look like for a new startup on the scene, a new founder from
Sure. Mhm.
start, like with
Yeah, yeah.
nothing there to actually finish, and an investor closing out?
And again, I think this is also to understanding your investors, right? Because there's different classes of investors, right? So there's, typical angel investors or like friends and family first, angel investors, which, are a type of friends and family. Then there are seed and, incubator, accelerator, or pre-seed investors. And then there's, A, B, C, and growth investors, right? So it's like you have to understand who you're approaching and when you're approaching them. And I think a lot of people I meet, they're like, "Oh, you're an investor, you'll just give me money," and it's like, no, well, that's not necessarily how it works, right? And it's like, okay, make sure you approach at the right time and you're talking to the right people because it's like, okay, if you have an idea, a pitch, talk to friends and family. If you don't have a rich uncle or rich aunt, then you go to the angels, you go to AngelList, and you go to incubators, right? And you apply to them, and you get feedback, and you kind of work that angle of it, or you do what others have done, and just do sweat equity and just build something and get it out there as fast as you can. Because again, the cost to create a startup is so cheap. Like Unity is free. All these tools, so many of these tools now are free, right? And so it's like, okay, it's not like before when you had to do a startup and you had to like buy hundreds of thousands of software just to even start, right? Like now it's like, oh my gosh, to start a startup, it's almost free, depending on, of course, what type of startup, but like a software startup in particular, right? It's not that much. But then this is the important part. It's like, okay, do you do an incubator? Do you do accelerator? Well, when do you talk to like institutional investors like the Venture Reality Fund? It's really when you start to get early product market fit, right? And that's why we're like, okay, even with a like demo or a POC, like we want to see again that this is something that's has shown that that they're that the users actually care about it, customers actually value it, and that this is something repeatable and scalable, right? I think in the very first stage, early stage, you're just like, can this even work? And then you're like, okay, well, now that will this work for 100 companies? Will this work for 10,000 users, right? That's when you want to start approaching more institutional investors, right? When you need to scale. But I think a lot of people, and for a long time for VR, right? It was like scaling wasn't even an option. We just had to prove it exists. So a lot of people were kind of investing in that earlier stage. But now it's definitely more of that, okay, now that we have VR out there, now that, they're publishers, doing publishing deals and things like that. And, enterprises and companies, that are helping put POCs together and really proving ROI. It's like, okay, that's not a VC's, job necessarily to help get you to that stage, but it's to get you to what comes next.
In one of the decks that I prepared to pitch why XR is important, why AR and VR are important. There is a diagram of the evolution of consumption of data and media. And it starts with a cinema. So you have a big room and the consumption is public. You have to go to a location in order to consume the cine news, as during the time of World War I and World War II. And I mean, it's something that is not real time, so it's kind of delayed compared to what's happening in the world and so on. And then after that, of course, you have the evolution with more intimate consumption. The first TV sets arrive in houses, especially in the United States, in the mid 1950s. And television and media become like a more sort of a cultural thing that you can discuss with your friends and people and family and so on. And then after that, of course, you have another jump, and we're talking about the personal computer, and where you have a fixed desk where you can go. The information is personal, is in real time, and you have the internet, and you can communicate with everyone in the world with your email, or you check your website. And then you have the personal computer, where we switch from being disconnected with the technology. So you have to move to the technology in order to consume the technology, and you become part of the technology. So we are all cyborg, we all have our mobile phones with us, and we feel lost without it. And obviously the next evolution is visual delivery of information. Now, my question is another provocative question. Obviously, we are not even yet at the big bang year of, or the iPhone moment for XR right now. Do you see, where is the next step? Is it Neuralink the next step? What is the next step?
No, I don't think it's Neuralink. I mean, I do think that is a future step, right? But I don't think that's necessary to get to the big bang moment, right? Like for me, when I think about this, I think less about the technology, and I think more about the applications and the value that it provides for people, right? And so for me, I think specifically about the journey of computers, right? And when it started like with big mainframes, right? And they were good for computational problems, for math problems, science, NASA was using it to send people to space, but thinking, okay, very few people had them, very people had access to them, very few people used them. Then once it evolved into the personal computer, right, then it, like we talked about, it democratized, 2D communication and 2D thinking, right? The keyboard and mouse with, Office, with Excel and PowerPoint and Word in particular, right? Like that changed everything. And that just allowed more people to access and to be part of this digital economy, digital, revolution, right? But you think about it and you're like, hey, well, how many people still are part of the digital economy, are productive in a computer? And, if you just look at sales, right, you're like, okay, it's like 2 to 3 billion, PCs and laptops are sold, right? And then it's like, well, the smartphone revolution, what happened there was it wasn't a productivity device. It was a communication device, and everyone needs to communicate. And so then it becomes like a bigger part of everyone's lives, right? And so now, 9 billion cell phones, more cell phones than the population of the world, right?
It goes down to a deeper level of need of human connection, right?
Yes. But what I think is really interesting is what VR can do, and AR, like spatial computing, is it can, like, just like how, 2D communication broadened like the mouse as an interface and Windows as a metaphor, allowed more people that weren't like, thinking about punch cards, allowed more people to access the computer. VR AR is a natural interface that works with the way that we live life. It makes the digital world as natural as the real world. That's going to lower the barriers to allow everyone to be productive in the digital economy. And that's impactful for everyone. And so I think that's what's really exciting and powerful for me. This idea of saying, hey, you know what? Like we see this, right? It's like the digital divide is a huge problem. And, the digital economy is infinite, right? Like it's only limited by our imagination. It's not limited by atoms and molecules like the real world economy and the real world markets, right? And so if we get more people being part of the digital economy, I think that's going to benefit everyone, right? That's going to unlock economic opportunity on a scale we've never seen before. Because if we can get the rest of the, 3 to 5 billion people that aren't part of the digital economy participating, then yeah, like that's the game. And this is going to be like a little strange, but this all ties back into this idea of the metaverse, right? And why is the metaverse powerful? But you think about what the metaverse represents, this idea that we live a digital life. It's the next evolution of, the internet, of social interaction, right? But it's not just playing games, but more importantly, you see this already with like Roblox, right? Like kids are paying for their college tuitions by making Roblox experiences that other people pay for, right? And that's the fundamental, for me, that's the biggest change or the biggest shift, is like when we can get more people creating digital things in the digital world that other people enjoy and will pay for, like that's when we have a real metaverse. And that's when we've really unlocked the power of this kind of, spatial computing. And like I said, with Rec Room, they're already kind of showing XR enables more creators. And if they can monetize, if you can have a job in VR using a VR headset, like why wouldn't you adopt one? And if it's a better job than you could currently get because it makes more sense, it's not programming, it's no code, it's much easier to use, it feels like the natural world. I think that's a huge victory.
So that means a lot of it is based around what the creativity that can come from this. I think it's really interesting because I think, like we were having this discussion even as a team and like with people that we work with, and it's all about this discussion on, this is for this to be an industry that we can all say, okay, is a space that, it is going to be around for all of us and we all want to be able to use. It's about having that native ability, right? The ability to be able to say, okay, I can use this in my everyday life. This is something that doesn't, it's something very easy to slip into, right? It's something very, I guess, simple as well. And it's not really like any of those friction points. And I think that's my difficulty with XR as well. It's like, I think there's a lot of stuff that we can do with it, a lot of ambition, a lot of kind of people working on really cool things. But I think I'm waiting for some of those friction points that, just getting in and out of XR. For me, the moment that goes and the moment I can just slide into XR just like that, that's a win-win, and I don't have any problems after that.
If I were to say to you, again, like I won't say you, but if I can go to someone that says, hey, you're making minimum wage right now, right? If I could offer you an $80,000 job, double your salary and double your life with the current VR AR tech and how much of a pain it is to use right now, like, don't you think they would take it? They would absolutely take it, right? And if you think about it, you're like, okay, well, if someone's creating something in a Roblox, right, and people are paying, and again, it's a small amount of people actually making significant amount of money, but that's like every creator community, right? But that promise is there, right? Like that future is very seeable now. And to say, hey, if it didn't feel like, and I'll take 3D modeling because I'm very familiar with it, right? But if 3D modeling felt less like I was doing CAD and pressing buttons and more like I was playing with Legos, right? Like, man, so many more people could do that, right? And it's so much more approachable, accessible, and potentially valuable in a metaverse.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting.
Did I blow your mind, Nick? You seem like
Nick's just sitting there.
I finally made
no, I'm fascinated by the concept of user-generated content. We discussed. We usually have a pre-call before recording our podcast, and both me and you, Tipatat, are hardcore gamer, and we discussed about the beauty of creation that has been made by the Sony PlayStation Studios. It's called Dreams, and how the interface is amazing and the game is wonderful, but it's kind of fading away and losing this kind of amazing opportunity of become like a phenomenon like Rec Room or like Roblox and so on. What is necessary for you to the recipe to head to this magic recipe of user-generated content experience to be successful, like Rec Room, which is again, we remind to everyone that is watching this podcast, is the first software unicorn in the VR industry.
Yeah,
that you invested on.
I love Dreams. I mean, Media Molecule I've been a fan of since, Little Big Planet, and every game they've done has just been beautifully designed, beautifully crafted, and the tech has been, unbelievable. But, I think the big miss, at one level, and it's tough because, they've been working on this for so long, right? But it's like social. Social is the big thing, right? Like that's what makes it valuable, especially real time. And you look at Roblox, right? Like, and I don't want to unfairly pick on Roblox, but you look at the visual quality. Like for people that don't play Roblox, when they look at Roblox, they're like, "What is this?" Right? But for the people that play, it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's fun. It's fantastic. I mean, I think people could make the same arguments about Minecraft back in the day, right? Where it's like, okay, but what's really interesting is having that social community, having people real time interacting with it, seeing what you're doing and being there with them, explaining it with them. Like that's what the real value is. And, where I think Rec Room really succeeds is in that social element where, it's a great social experience, especially by adding, like you're building inside the application. And this is what really differentiates it from something like a Roblox, where you're building inside the game. You're not building an external tool and bringing it in. You're building in the game, but you can also build socially. So your friends can be there at the same time, and you guys can be collaborating and working on something together, right? Like that's really powerful and impacting. But the other thing I think that Rec Room did really, really well was they didn't launch with UGC. Right? Like I think so many tool makers and so many like metaverse people I've seen have said this. So it's like, bring out the tools, let people figure it out. And it's like, well, you really need that first party content to make it sticky, to really showcase what the tools can do, what types of experiences you have, and that those experiences are valuable, have good retention, that people want to come back and play it day and day. So I think once you have that foundation, then you can build on top of it. Then you can add UGC and let people start modding. Because I think, again, it's like blank canvas problem. Like if it's infinite, people get stuck. So only a very small subset of creators will like really tackle that. But if it's mods, you're saying, okay, well, here's a cool game. Oh, but I'd like to customize it. I'd like to maybe change some of the levels, maybe change like some of the appearances, or maybe what weapons you can use. Like that's like the gateway into UGC. And I think Rec Room did a beautiful job of having like 3 or 4 core experiences that then people start remixing and playing with, and then people start going even crazier and bigger. And so, they've gradually built over time this really fantastic thing, working with the community, listening to them and growing the community. And I think that's, a combination of their smarts, their talents, and their ambitions, right? And it's really worked well.
So shall we say that, so a piece of advice for everyone that wants to build a UGC based experience in VR or any other kind of game should have an initial story-driven, or eventually like a sort of a tutorial or something that will show the technology so other people can build on top of that example?
I would push back too. I wouldn't say a story or tutorial, because Dreams has that, and it's actually pretty cool. Like the Dreams like intro thing, it's very well done. It's very polished. But I think having a core game like Little Big Planet was like its core game, and like people play that, it was fun, and they're like, okay, now I want to change that up. Right. I felt like when you play, Dreams, and sorry, I'm going to go deep into Dreams now. What was it like? Art's Dream, or like, the musician piece. It's like a beautiful, fun, interactive experience, but it's not something that you want to mod and like riff off of. Right. You're like, okay, like that was cool, but I don't know what to do with that. Right. And so it's like, again, I think with Rec Room, where like, okay, they build a paintball game, and that's cool. And then people are like, okay, I'd like to change the levels. And it's like, oh, that's an easy way to kind of get into it. So you have a core game that already is sticky, that already people love playing, and then you kind of build on top of that, right? As opposed to saying, hey, we're going to show you something, a tutorial or a story mode that's really cool, really amazing, but isn't the actual game experience that most people are going to be doing and building off of. I think that's a disconnect.
Oh man,
So
there's so much I really want to unpack here, but I know that we're kind of running out of time a little bit. But I guess like just to sort of finish things off a little bit is obviously you've launched the next kind of version of your fund, kind of the VR Fund 2. Going forward, what kind of companies can we expect to see within that kind of portfolio?
Oh gosh, I mean, honestly, I think with this fund, hopefully, again, we're always looking for driver applications. What's going to make this VR, AR, spatial future happen sooner rather than later? I think, again, with the first fund, it was a lot of applications like, driver applications, whether they're the best games or the best enterprise applications. But we also did, computer vision and deep tech enabling technologies that would unlock that. right? And we actually even did a hardware company, Vario, right? That's building this world-class enterprise headset that if you've tried it, you're like, this is the headset from the future, right? And so understanding like we're going to do that and do more of all of that, and hopefully in a bigger way. And, hopefully we'll fund the next, group of VR, AR, AI unicorns. I think that's kind of what we're hoping to do. I think.
Do you think that there is still space for, sorry to interrupt, do you think that there is still space for hardware breakthrough in the XR space?
Absolutely.
I mean, it seems to me that
absolutely
the big companies are kind of owning a lot of patents and technology and knowledge, and all the big names in the industry, John Carmack and so on. So do you think that there is still someone in a little garage that is building the headset of the future?
Absolutely. And again, there's so many different ways that innovation takes place, right? Like, again, it's understanding there's going to be like, especially on AR, right? Like with VR, okay, it's much more commodified, much more solidified what a good VR headset should be. But in terms of AR, right? Like when you try even the latest and the best of like the HoloLens 2 and all these others, they are amazing technology. But there's so much work that needs to be done on the optics, on the input. And it's just like, and this is the whole thing of startups. It's like there's some innovation or some breakthrough that's done at small companies that can't be done at larger companies because they can move faster or they can be more experimental. There's less on the line. They don't have the resources, but we see this time and time again. And eventually they'll probably have to team up with the larger companies to bring it to the market. But gosh, we have a huge laundry list. And what I used to love was at the Oculus or Facebook Connects, it was like Michael Abrash would come out and say, okay, this is what we have. This is what we need to do. This is how long we think it's going to take, given the state of the art. And then it's like, okay, then you'll meet this crazy company from Israel saying, okay, we can do better than that. And we can do that next year or something. Right. And that's the excitement of being in this space and saying, okay, yeah. I mean, given time and resources, the big companies will get us there. Okay. But we're going to find these innovative startups that are going to, zig while others zag, use more experimental technologies, put together things that other people haven't even heard of yet that are coming out of some, academic lab. And then boom, it's going to be this game changer.
And for those of you that want to actually learn more about that Vario kind of product and that investment, we've got another Field of View episode with Jussi from Vario talking about that in a lot more detail as well.
Tipatat, thank you so much for being with us. This has been incredibly interesting and very entertaining, I have to say. We didn't have much time to talk about our common passion of gaming, but maybe for the next podcast we could deep dive into hardcore gaming and VR gaming.
Yeah, no, this
Thank
was
you so
a lot
much
of
for
fun,
being with
guys.
us.
And, happy to do it anytime. This was an honor and I really enjoyed the conversation. And
I was going to say, there's, I had to put a pause on things. So there's so much I wanted to unpack. We could do a whole deep dive just going into the social aspect of XR and what drives those things. You could go deep dive into what makes an ideal investor compared to, we talk a lot about what's an ideal founder, but what's an ideal investor as well. Like all of these things, so many aspects to it.
I have so many opinions on all of that. But, definitely, please, if you're a startup, honestly, too, like we're open to talking at any stage, like, even at the pre-seed, if you just want feedback and advice, we won't probably write you that check, but we'll give you some, feedback and we'll try to be as helpful as we can. So, reach out to me. I'm at Tipatat on Twitter, Tipatat, Tipatat at thevrfund.com. You can reach out to me over email. Don't reach out to me on LinkedIn because LinkedIn is a mess. But yeah, definitely. Thanks again for this opportunity, guys. Really enjoy talking with you guys both, and great questions. And honestly, I could talk for days about any of these things. And maybe next time too, if we want to deep dive on a subject, I can bring some of the portfolio companies, and they can talk too, because they're the ones that are actually doing it.
Let's definitely book in a part 2.
Okay,
yeah, let's do it.
All right, thanks.
All right, sounds good. Well, just a reminder to everyone that is watching this, Field of View you can catch kind of on a regular basis by going to AIXR.org. We have Field of View listed on there. You can also find it there on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, all of these different places, wherever you get your podcasts. And the great thing is you can actually subscribe on our website to be able to get notifications every time a new episode comes out, alongside with actually being able to follow socials on on Twitter or Facebook or any of those platforms as well, and LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn is not as much of a mess as Tipatats, so we're okay there. Aside from that, is there anything else you want to say, Nick?
Yeah, let's get connected. Nicola Rosa, at Nicola Rosa on Twitter, NICOLA-ROSA. You can find me there, and on LinkedIn as well. Please follow all the activities that we're having on immersive learning and Accenture.com. We're having some amazing stuff to show, everything that is related to extended reality. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much, Tipatat, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Through accessible insights, a solid network of support, and recognizing truly outstanding achievements near or far. Big or small, we're in this together. AIXR.